fabled heat, where magic meets desire. Subscribe to ignite the fantasy.
The Gilded Page was more than a bookshop. It was a sanctuary carved from the bones of the old city. Nestled between a crumbling cathedral whose stained glass windows wept rain and a salt-encrusted fishmonger that sang of brine and iron, its arched windows were perpetually fogged with the breath of 1,000 stories. The scent of aged paper mingled with beeswax polish and a faint, ever-present hint of sea brine that seeped through the stone walls, as if the ocean itself whispered through the cracks. Ayalara inherited the shop from my grandmother, and before her from a line of women who whispered magic into the very grain of the wood. My fingers knew each shelf by heart, each creak of the floorboards, each sigh of the ancient tomes. I loved the quiet intimacy of the shelves, the way my fingertips brushed the embossed spines, feeling the faint pulse of lingering enchantments. When I ran my thumb over a vellum-bound grimoire, a soft hum rose, like a moth's wing against glass. It was a language older than any tongue, a promise that the stories here were alive. The rain had been falling since dawn, a steady percussion on the cobblestones that turned the street into a river of silver. I stood behind the counter, polishing a brass lantern, when the bell above the door, usually a gentle chime, rang like a warning. The sound cut through the hush, startling the dust motes that danced in the amber light. He entered. Silas Thorne paused in the doorway, water dripping from his hat, his coat dark as a storm-clouded sky. He was tall, his shoulders broad enough to shelter a small child, his hair slicked back by the rain, his eyes storm clouds themselves, searching the room with a hunger that made my breath catch. The air seemed to thicken, the scent of rain and pine clinging to his skin, mingling with the perfume of old paper. Our eyes met and a current of heat surged through me, startling my breath. It was as if the very air between us crackled with a secret spell. He stepped forward, the hem of his coat brushing the polished floor, and his hand found mine on the counter. His touch was warm, the heat of his palms searing against my skin, sending a shiver of longing down my spine. "Alara," he whispered, his voice low and urgent, "the key is hidden in the oldest volume. If the darkness takes it, the city will drown in its own stories." I felt his breath ghost over my ear, a promise and a threat intertwined. My heart hammered, a fierce ache I had never known, as the shadows beyond the windows seemed to close in, hungry for the secret we guarded. I slipped a silver key from beneath the counter, its metal cool against my palm, and pressed it into his hand. "We'll find it together," I said, my voice trembling with desire and dread. Silas's lips brushed my ear, a fleeting kiss that tasted of rain and ink, and the world narrowed to the heat between us. The books around us began to hiss, pages fluttering like angry wings, as if the shelves themselves were alive and aware of the danger. We turned toward the back room, where the oldest tome waited, its leather cover cracked and pulsing with ancient magic. The darkness pressed against the door, but we were already moving as two bodies bound by fate, by longing, by the promise of a love that could rewrite the very stories that surrounded us. The back room was a cavern of shadows, lit only by the amber glow of a single lantern that swayed gently on a wrought iron hook. The walls were lined with towering stacks of books, each one a monument to forgotten eras. I could hear the faint rustle of pages turning on their own, a susurrus that seemed to echo the rhythm of my own pulse. Silas moved ahead, his boots silent on the stone floor. I followed, my own steps careful, as if the floor might betray us with a creak. The key in his hand glinted, catching the lantern light and throwing tiny shards of silver across the dust. "Do you remember the first time you opened the Gilded Page?" he asked, his voice barely louder than the rain outside. I smiled despite the tension coiling in my chest. My grandmother used to tell me that the shop chose its keeper. She said the walls listen, the books remember, and the very air is stitched with stories waiting to be told. I was 6 when I first felt the hum of the vellum grimoire. It was like a heartbeat, steady and ancient. Silas chuckled, a low sound that seemed to vibrate the very shelves. "And now you are the heartbeat of this place." I felt a blush rise to my cheeks, a heat that rivaled the one from his touch. I never asked why I was given this burden. I only know that I cannot let the darkness win. He stopped before a massive oak cabinet, its doors bound with iron bands etched with runes that pulsed faintly blue. He placed the key into the lock, and the iron sang a note that resonated through the room, reverberating off the spines of the books. The doors swung open with a sigh, revealing a single volume perched on a velvet cushion. Its cover was leather dark as midnight, cracked with age, and a single silver sigil, a feathered quill, glowed faintly at its center. The Chronicle of Tides, Silas breathed, reverence in his tone. It is said to contain the first story ever written, the story that gave birth to all others. If the darkness can claim it, it will rewrite the world in its own image. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and brushed the cover. The moment my skin made contact, a surge of cold shot through me, followed by a warmth that felt like 1,000 suns pressed into a single point. The book opened of its own accord, pages fluttering as if caught in an unseen wind. Words rose from the parchment, forming a luminous script that hovered above the page. I could see the story of the city itself, its founding, its rise, its fall, written in a language of light and shadow. The darkness outside the shop seemed to press harder, a low growl that vibrated the stone. "We must read it," Silas said, his voice urgent. "Only by understanding the story can we find the counter-spell." I nodded, my mind racing. The rain hammered the windows, each drop a drumbeat that matched the thudding of my heart. I turned the page, and the words shifted, forming a map of the city's ley lines, the veins of magic that pulsed beneath the cobblestones. "Here," I whispered, pointing to a faint line that glowed amber, "the heart of the city. If we conceal the breach there, the darkness will have nowhere to feed." Silas stepped closer, his breath warm against my cheek. "Then we go at once." But the book resisted. A gust of cold wind slammed the pages shut, and a shadowy tendril slithered from the ink, coiling around my wrist. I felt a pressure, as if the very essence of the story tried to pull me into its depths. "Hold on," Silas shouted, his hand closing around mine. His grip was iron, his resolve unshakable. He whispered an incantation I recognized from my grandmother's teachings, a low chant that resonated with the hum of the grimoire. The tendril recoiled, hissing like a wounded serpent, and the darkness beyond the windows seemed to recoil as well, as if the spell had created a barrier. "You have the gift, Alara," Silas said, his eyes softening. "Your blood runs with the magic of the shop. Together we can bind this." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, not from fear, but from the sudden realization of how much I had been holding alone for generations. The weight of my ancestors' expectations lifted, replaced by a shared purpose. "Tell me what you feel," I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He placed his forehead against mine, and I could hear the rhythm of his heart, steady and fierce. In that moment, the world narrowed to the space between us, the crackling of magic and the distant roar of the storm. "I feel the city's pulse," he said, a rhythm of hope and fear intertwined. "I feel the stories yearning to be told, to be saved. And I feel you, Alara, your strength, your fear, your love." A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the shop, casting the shelves in stark, white light. The rain outside surged, turning the street into a torrent of silver. The darkness at the edge of the windows writhed, a mass of ink-black tendrils seeking entry. "We must act now," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The Chronicle will guide us, but we need to seal the breach before the tide rises too high." Silas nodded, and together we lifted the ancient tome, its weight a reminder of the centuries it had survived. We carried it through the narrow aisles, past the rows of poetry that whispered verses of love, past the grimoires that crackled with dormant spells. When we reached the back wall, a hidden alcove opened, revealing a stone archway pulsing with a faint blue light. The archway was the city's heart, a conduit for all the stories that flowed through the streets. The darkness pressed against it, trying to seep through the cracks. "The key," Silas said, holding up the silver key, "must be placed at the center. It will bind the arch and seal the breach." I placed the key into the center of the arch. As it settled, a resonant tone rang out like a bell tolling across centuries. The blue light flared, expanding outward, pushing the darkness back with a force that felt like the tide turning. The Chronicle's pages fluttered, and the luminous script rose, spiraling around the arch like a vortex of light. The words formed a protective sigil, sealing the breach with a seal of pure story. The darkness recoiled, shrieking as it was forced back into the void. The rain outside seemed to ease, the storm's fury dimming as the city's heart beat steady once more. Silas turned to me, his eyes shining with triumph and something deeper, an affection that had been kindling since the moment he stepped through the door. "You did it," he breathed, his hand finding mine again, this time not out of necessity but out of reverence. I squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his palm against mine, the same warmth that had ignited that first spark between us. "We did it," I corrected, a smile tugging at my lips. "The Gilded Page is safe, and so is the city." He stepped closer, his breath warm against my cheek, and whispered, "And now, perhaps, we can write our own story, Ilara." The words hung in the air, a promise that felt as ancient as the books surrounding us. I felt a surge of hope, a feeling that the future could be as boundless as the stories that lined the shelves. We stood there hand in hand, the lantern's flame dancing between us, casting shadows that seemed to form letters of their own. The rain outside had softened to a gentle patter, the storm retreating like a defeated beast. In the quiet that followed, I heard the faint hum of the vellum grimoire once more, a soft, contented vibration that resonated with my own heartbeat. It was a reminder that the shop was alive, that the magic within its walls was not just a relic of the past, but a living, breathing force. Silas turned his gaze to the rows of books, his eyes lingering on a volume of love poems bound in rose-colored leather. "Do you think they ever read us, Ilara?" he asked, a playful smile tugging at his lips. I laughed, the sound light and free. "Perhaps they do. Perhaps we are just another tale waiting to be told." He brushed a stray lock of rain-slicked hair from my face, his fingers lingering on my cheek. "Then let us make it a good one," he said, his voice low and earnest. The night stretched on, the shop bathed in the soft glow of lanterns, the rain a distant lullaby. We walked the aisles together, sharing stories of our pasts, of the burdens we carried, of the dreams we dared not voice before. I told him of my grandmother's whispered lessons, of the night she taught me to listen to the sigh of the shelves, to feel the pulse of the stories. He told me of his own lineage, of a family of storm chasers who had once guarded the city's borders against the very darkness we had just defeated. As the hours slipped by, the bond between us deepened, each revelation a thread weaving us tighter together. The shop seemed to respond, the books rustling in approval, the air humming with a quiet joy. When dawn finally crept through the fogged windows, painting the stone floor with pale gold, we stood before the counter, the silver key now a simple ornament on the wood. "What will you do now, Silas?" I asked, curiosity bright in my eyes. He smiled, a smile that warmed the chill of the early morning. "I will stay," he said, his hand finding mine once more. "There is much to learn here, and I think I have found a purpose I never knew I needed." My heart swelled, a mixture of relief and affection. "Then let us write the next chapter together," I replied, my voice steady, my resolve firm. He leaned in, his lips brushing my forehead in a tender kiss that felt like a promise sealed by ink and rain. The Gilded Page, with its fogged windows and whispered magic, had always been a sanctuary. Now it was also a place of love, of partnership, of stories yet to be told. And as the city outside awoke to a new day, the shop's doors remained open, inviting anyone who sought refuge, knowledge, or a glimpse of the magic that lived between the pages. In that moment, I understood that the true power of the Gilded Page was not just in the books it housed, but in the hearts of those who tended its shelves. Together, Silas and I would guard its secrets, nurture its stories, and perhaps, one day, add our own tale to the endless tapestry of the city's legend. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a fresh scent of petrichor that mingled with the lingering aroma of beeswax and sea brine. I inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the world lift, replaced by a quiet certainty. "Come," Silas said, his voice soft as the turning of a page, "let us walk the streets and see the city we have saved." Hand in hand, we stepped out of the Gilded Page, the bell above the door chiming a gentle farewell. The streets glistened with rain-kissed cobblestones, and the city seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. As we walked, the cathedral's stained glass windows caught the morning light, casting colors that danced across the stone. The fishmonger's stall, now dry, still held the faint scent of iron and sea, a reminder of the world beyond the shop's walls. We paused at a fountain in the square, its water sparkling like liquid crystal. Silas knelt, cupping the cool water in his hands, and offered it to me. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes reflecting the sunrise. I took the water, feeling its chill travel up my throat, and raised my glass in return. "To stories that never end," I replied, my voice steady, my heart full. The city around us seemed to pulse with renewed life, the darkness receding like a tide pulled back by the moon. and as we stood there, two souls bound by destiny and desire, I knew that the gilded page would continue to be a beacon for all who sought refuge in words, a place where love could blossom amidst the rustle of pages. The future stretched before us, an unwritten manuscript waiting for our ink, and together, Silas and I would write it, one chapter at a time.